Ukraine has become the master of robot warfare. There are no ifs or buts about it. Ukraine's robot army is growing. It's getting stronger, and it's playing a crucial role in helping Ukraine to win its war against Russia. Nobody saw this coming when Putin invaded. What was supposed to be a war of man and metal has transformed to the point where it's not even humans who are doing the most important work for Ukraine. The numbers are in. Ground robots are doing more for Ukraine than ever before. And one of the most prominent officials in the US has declared that it would be a huge mistake for the American military not to follow Ukraine's lead. In a July 9th report, Euromaidan Press revealed that Ukraine's ground robots carried out more missions in June than they have in any month so far during the war with Russia. These metal marvels have become a common sight across the front lines as they do everything from carting around supplies and equipment to evacuating soldiers and even in some cases, launching assaults against Russian positions. Ukraine's Ministry of Defense says that Ukraine's ground robots performed over 16,600 logistics and evacuation missions in June, and the country's defense minister Mikhailo Fedorov explains why that matters. Every mission a robot performs instead of a military one is a potentially saved life, Fedorov declares. We couldn't have put it better ourselves. But what's even more remarkable than the sheer number of missions Ukraine's ground robots performed in June is the steep climb that we've seen in these types of robot missions. Here's the rundown. In January, ground robots performed 7,511 missions. February saw that rise to 7,960. Then it was 9,072 in March, 11,028 in April, 14,059 in May. June saw Ukraine add 2,500 missions to its monthly total, and that has to worry Russia. If Ukraine continues this trend, there will soon be no logistical missions on the front being carried out by soldiers. For Russia, that means fewer opportunities to take out Ukrainian soldiers, which has the knock-on effect of enabling Ukraine to keep its fortifications stronger for longer. It all adds up to more casualties for Russia, albeit indirectly. What all of this adds up to is that Ukraine's ground robots performed 18.6% more missions in June than they did in May, and they've more than doubled their output since January. The June figures are 122% higher than those we saw during the first month of the year. In total, during the first half of 2026, Ukraine's robots have completed over 66,300 missions, and now Ukraine has a simple goal: switch out soldiers for ground robots so that the latter are carrying out 100% of frontline logistics missions. The only thing holding Ukraine back now is connectivity, rather than hardware, says Defense Ministry advisor Serhiy Bezkresnov. To bring its drone army to its full potential, Ukraine has to overcome the challenges that terrain, tree lines, and urban infrastructure pose to the signals that keep the ground robots running. We've seen Ukraine innovate constantly since the beginning of this war. It will come up with solutions, perhaps involving the use of AI to automate pathfinding so that signal dropouts aren't an issue anymore. But that's for the future. What's certain now is that Ukraine is 100% committed to making ground robots a key part of its frontline strategy. And it's not just the Ministry of Defense that says so. Ukraine's soldiers are also all in on allowing robots to replace them wherever those robots are able. Ukraine's Ministry of Defense says that various units across the front lines have already received 1,028 ground robots of various configurations via the dot-chain defense weapons marketplace in May. That matters because this marketplace operates on a points system. Soldiers get points for various feats, including scoring drone kills and completing ground robot operations. They then trade these points for the systems they believe they need most on the front. So this isn't just 1,028 ground robots delivered. It's 1,028 robots that have been specifically chosen by soldiers on the front because they are needed. And to add to all of this, Euromaidan Press reveals that soldiers have ordered 3,062 ground robots from this marketplace in total, representing a value of $46.6 million. In other words, the Ministry of Defense's push to have ground robots take over frontline duties is being supported by the very soldiers these robots are replacing. This may well be the first instance where people actually want robots to arrive and take their jobs. The goal is for all frontline logistics to be handled by robots. That goal has complete buy-in from Ukraine's troops. Over in the US, one man has made it very clear that it's about time that America really started paying attention to Ukraine's drone and robot revolution. Shocked by the effectiveness of everything that Ukraine has achieved, Senator Lindsey remarked on July 10th that it would be a huge mistake for the US not to work with Ukraine to take advantage of the country's ever-growing drone and robot expertise. The comments were made when Graham visited Ukraine and touted the manufacturing facilities of drone manufacturer Skyfall. "Today I visited a state-of-the-art enterprise with enormous production capacity that manufactures technologies far more advanced than anyone else on the planet. Necessity is the mother of all invention," Graham said, before adding his warning to the US. "I think it would be a huge mistake for America not to work with Ukraine in the drone space. They are willing to help because we were willing to support Ukraine in its darkest times," Graham declared. There is an unfortunate postscript to this part of the story. On July 12th, the news broke that Senator Graham had passed away following a brief and sudden illness. Details are still filtering through, but Graham had just returned from his trip to Ukraine, where he met President Volodymyr Zelensky, in addition to touring the Skyfall facility and making his call for the US to get on board with Ukraine's drone and robotics revolution. Hailed as a true American patriot by US President Donald Trump, Graham has essentially used his final message to tell the US that what Ukraine is doing is something special and that the American military needs to get on board. That is a sad shock, but it may just make the US realize that Ukraine has become a much more valuable partner than anybody had realized. Ground robots are just one of the reasons why that partnership is so valuable to America, as Ukraine demonstrates every day that its technological advances are enabling it to seize the initiative from Russia. Let's focus on Russia for a moment. As Ukraine's ground robots do the business on the front lines, Russian soldiers must be crying out for something similar to support them. Ukraine is handling frontline logistics robotically. As for Russia, its soldiers have to do everything manually, as Putin orders his troops on death marches that are tearing through his army. But before we dig deeper into that, this is a reminder that you are watching The Military Show. If you're getting insight from this video, then make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss what we have coming next. We take you to the front lines in Kherson. There, United 24 media reports Russian soldiers are being forced to march more than 10 kilometers just to reach frontline positions in the first place. But it's not just the march through drone-infested kill zones that's a problem for Putin's forces. Those soldiers have to carry ammunition and supplies on foot to reach the Dnipro axis, where the battle for territory in Kherson is raging. This logistical challenge is being compounded by Ukraine's forces expanding their kill zones to cover more of the territory through which Russia's troops have to trudge. This revelation comes from Serhiy Sahiev, who is the spokesperson for Ukraine's 34th Separate Marine Brigade. "We have established such strong control that we are expanding our kill zone every day. If you look at the map, Kosta Razova, Radensk, Russian forces can no longer feel safe there. We can reach them everywhere, find them, and destroy them. We can say we have the initiative," Serhiev said, before he explained what Ukraine's forces are now seeing on the front. The Russians can no longer reach their positions by vehicle. They have to carry ammunition and supplies themselves and walk 10 to 11 kilometers to reach infantry or artillery positions. What we see here is a deadly contrast. Ukraine is replacing the soldiers that would have made these kinds of trips in the past with robots that are difficult to spot as they travel and have become part of a modernized network of logistics that is keeping Ukraine alive. Russia's response is to send meat, as always. It can't match up to Ukraine on the robot front, so it packs ammo and supplies onto soldiers and tells them to march through the kill zones. Those soldiers, burdened by what they're carrying, move slower and become obvious targets for Ukraine's ever-present drones. As soon as the soldier is spotted, it's all over. Either they die to a drone strike or they have to drop what they're carrying and run to stand any chance of surviving the attack. Either way, Russian frontline logistics fall apart. And it's Putin's failure to invest in the type of technology that Ukraine uses so well that is the reason why. The results on the front speak for themselves. In the same June where Ukraine achieved its ground robots record, Russia achieved a grim record of its own: 39,490 combat casualties. Ukraine is moving closer to its goal of 50,000 per month, which Fedorov and Zelensky both say will be enough to make the war that Putin started untenable from a recruitment standpoint. Russia isn't finding any solutions to its logistics problems. Liga adds that it's not just a few kilometers leading up to the front where Putin's troops are getting blown apart before they're able to get supplies and ammo to where they need to be. Logistics for the Russian military at the depths of 20 to 70 kilometers are becoming increasingly expensive and dangerous for Russia as Ukraine expands the range of its drones. We saw a mention of a lack of vehicles in Kherson. The same is happening all over Ukraine, declares Ruslan Muzychuk, who is the spokesperson for Ukraine's National Guard. According to Muzychuk, Russian supply convoys have become a thing of the past, with the best that Russia can manage usually being a single vehicle, which becomes an obvious target for Ukraine's drones. Ukraine has expanded its strikes against Russian ammunition and fuel depots by 30 kilometers to add to this problem, and it's now at a point where it's hitting over 190 of these types of targets every month. Go even further beyond the front, into the 50 to 200 kilometer range, and we're seeing similar destruction. The Atlantic Council points out that another of Ukraine's robotics innovations, mid-range drones, is making it almost impossible for Russia to maintain a steady logistical network behind the front. Those drones are conducting attacks against trucks using logistical routes that Russia has established in the occupied territories. They're taking out air defenses, drone launch sites, and command and control points that have been established to organize Russia's assaults on the front. Crimea has felt the impact of this chaos in the Russian rear and is now struggling with a massive fuel shortage as Ukraine isolates the peninsula. But the effects are being felt throughout Ukraine. This is a layered logistical lockdown. Fuel and supplies are taken out en masse in the Russian rear. Whatever makes it through to the near rear is also being targeted, as attacks against vehicles, fuel depots, and ammunition storage sites have reduced Russia to sending out individual vehicles, assuming it even has vehicles to send in the first place. In Kherson, there are clearly no vehicles. There are also no ground robots. Russian soldiers have to make themselves slow-moving targets in the kill zones as they attempt to carry ammo and supplies 10 kilometers to a front line that most of these soldiers will never see. Ukraine's drones will take care of them long before they can haul their cargo to where it's needed. Russia's approach to logistics now looks positively antiquated when compared to Ukraine's brilliant use of frontline ground robots. This isn't to say that Russia isn't desperately trying to ape Ukraine's ground robot logistics revolution. We'd be lying to you if we tried to claim otherwise. As Pravda reported in May, Russia actually received its first ground robot system back in 2024. But as has so often been the case, Russia failed to realize just how important these robots could be, and even with all of its resources, it hasn't invested enough into ground robots to prevent situations like ordering encumbered soldiers to walk for 10 kilometers in lethal Ukrainian kill zones. The numbers showcase the difference between Russia and Ukraine on the ground robot front. Pravda says that Russia has around 20 companies that produce 29 different types of ground robots. 12 of those companies are under Western sanctions, which doesn't help Russia one bit. By contrast, Ukraine has codified 67 new types of ground robots during the first quarter of 2026 alone. That's more than double the number of types of robots that Russia has developed in total, all in 3 months. Ukraine is also investing heavily into getting more ground robots onto the front lines. The first half of 2026 has already seen Ukraine contract about 25,000 robots. That's more than double the number of robots purchased in all of 2025, and Ukraine isn't going to stop there. The plan, according to Zelensky, is to have produced around 50,000 ground robots by the end of the year. And remember, these robots aren't like FPV drones. They're not running kamikaze missions, which means they aren't one-and-done pieces of equipment. Ukraine can use these robots over and over until Russia is lucky enough to take them out. As Ukraine boosts its production even more, it will have a veritable army of ground robots to replace frontline soldiers. As for Russia, it will have what we're seeing in Kherson: antiquated manual logistics that can't stand up against the sheer force of Ukraine's kill zones. Let's look at the broader picture. Why does Ukraine breaking yet more records in ground robot deployment really matter? We've talked about replacing manpower, and that's the most obvious benefit. Every ground robot on the front is preserving the life of a soldier who might have been forced onto a logistics run if that robot wasn't there. In the calculus of war, that's using one resource to save a much more valuable resource. But when we talk about calculus, we also have to talk about the cost. According to RBC Ukraine, the ground robots that Ukraine is building typically cost between $2,000 and $40,000. That's peanuts in modern warfare, especially for platforms that can do everything from carting supplies around and evacuating soldiers to laying mines, launching FPV drones, and even carrying out strike missions of their own. We can also do some napkin math to see that Ukraine will spend between $100 million and $2 billion on ground robots in 2026. But when these robots are carrying out so many missions and saving lives in the process, then $1 billion-plus investment starts to make sense. It's especially the case when we see how ground robots are completely redefining a front line that Russia tries to dominate with meat and metal. Both are running low for Russia right now, which makes Ukraine's transition to ground robotics even more important. Zelensky has already called this technology the next big step in saving soldiers' lives, and what he means by that is simple. Ukraine has its own manpower crisis, and these robots are helping to solve it. After more than 4 years of war, Ukraine has found itself struggling to recruit. Draft dodging and instances of soldiers going absent without leave are on the rise, the Long War Journal reports. Ukraine is trying to address the problems. Contract reforms that introduce 3 types of military contracts, ranging from 10 to 24 months depending on the role the new recruit will play, have been introduced, and pay for assault infantry troops has been increased to about $6,700 per month, which is about 10 times Ukraine's average monthly pay. A new deferment system also protects soldiers from future mobilization once their contract ends. Still, Ukraine has manpower challenges. Solving these challenges is perhaps the key role that ground robots will play as the war moves deeper into 2026 and beyond. The cheapest of these robots costs less than a third of an assault soldier's monthly wage. So Ukraine would be foolish not to invest. And with these robots in play, many of those soldiers can stay behind the front line in relative safety as they control their robots from afar. Less risk to the soldier, better logistics for Ukraine. That, ultimately, is why Ukraine's ground robot industry exploded in 2025, growing by 488% compared to the year before, and that growth has clearly continued. Infantry isn't disappearing. There is still a requirement for infantry whenever Ukraine wants to retake territory. That's the case even when we throw aerial drones into the mix alongside ground robots. But what this new generation of machines does is make it much easier for infantry to do their jobs. Ground robots keep troops supplied and evacuate the wounded, while drones target Russian soldiers in their fortifications. What was once a manual process that required runners handling logistics and soldiers going from building to building or trench to trench has been streamlined to mitigate risk. And if Ukraine can solve the communication and signals challenges, ground robots will become even more important. Mesh networks are being proposed as a solution, and they could be a game changer. But even without these upcoming advances, Ukraine's ground robots hold the game-changer distinction. Ukraine's robot army broke another record for missions completed in June. That's 6 months of record-breaking out of 6, and we'd put money on July being another record-breaking month. And then August, and then you get the picture. The robot revolution is happening in Ukraine as we speak. Russia is failing to keep up. Its soldiers march to their deaths as Ukraine's robots stand on the verge of playing their part in Ukraine winning the war. Innovation is at the heart of everything that Ukraine does. And there are times when Ukraine comes up with the most unlikely of weapons that it transforms into an absolute killer. We've seen all sorts, from ground robots carrying mines into assaults to sea drones destroying Russian ships. But what we hadn't seen until recently is fence posts. Yeah, that's right, fence posts. Ukraine has developed a remarkable new weapon that is as simple as it is devastating, and you can find out more about it if you watch our video. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to the Military Show as we analyze the latest developments in Ukraine's approach to its war against Russia. And thank you, as always, for watching.